cadet died, another went into a coma, a hologram got shot, and the entire first class of Starfleet recruits watched their training exercise turn into a hostage situation orchestrated by a cannibalistic army 2 episodes ago. 2 episodes and 6 weeks of in-universe time, and one of those 2 episodes was a vacation episode of a 4-day weekend. The show skipped past 6 weeks of recovery, spent an hour on spring break and a wedding, and then decided it was time to address the fact that its students watch classmates die. And Starfleet Academy, the flagship institution of an organization that employs a 900-year-old doctor and has the medical technology to regrow limbs, is just now getting around to the emotional processing. Not because the cadets are demanding it, not because somebody broke down, but because the Chancellor personally called a theoretical engineer who somehow became a theater teacher and flew her in from the Beta Quadrant. That was the plan. And that was the best that Starfleet Academy could do. Now, I'm getting tired of making this argument, and believe me, I really am. But every week I sit down and explain that this show's institutions don't behave like institutions. And every week the show hands me more evidence. The Life of the Stars is the most comprehensive example yet of a show that can't tell the difference between depicting institutional failure and just committing it. And I'm starting to think that the writers can't either. A cadet died on the Miyazaki. His name was Bavi. He was a Vulcan, part of the War College, and he is dead. A student killed during an operation that Starfleet Academy sanctioned, and in any military academy on Earth today, right now. With our comparatively primitive grief counseling infrastructure, there would be mandatory debriefs within 48 hours. Critical incident stress management, peer support activation. The machine moves fast after a death because the research is clear that the window for effective trauma intervention is very narrow, and it closes. And I want to point something out, because this show exists in 2026, not just the 32nd century. We live in a country where students are watching classmates die. Mass shootings in schools, ICE raids pulling people out of classrooms in violent manners. The experience of institutional violence happening to young people in education settings is not science fiction for this audience. It's just a Tuesday. So in Starfleet Academy, a show about students aimed at young adults depicts an institution that waits 6 weeks to address a psychological fallout, it's not just bad world building, it's tone deaf to the reality its own audience is living in. Starfleet has 9 centuries of additional psychological research on top of ours. They have Betazed telepaths. They have holographic therapy programs. They have institutional resources so far beyond what any military academy in human history has ever had access to that the gap should be incomprehensible. And since this show loves its DS9 callbacks, in Hard Time, the Argrathi had a technology that could simulate an entire lifetime of experience inside someone's mind in a matter of hours. 20 years of simulated imprisonment delivered in an afternoon. If that technology existed in the 24th century, imagine what the 32nd century has. You could theoretically process months of therapeutic work in a single session. The tools to accelerate recovery beyond anything we can imagine are baked into the setting. And Starfleet Academy waited 6 weeks to even start the conversation. They waited, and the show doesn't frame this as a failure. If Captain Ake were wrestling with the fact that she dropped the ball, if we saw the institution grappling with its own inadequacy, that's a story, a post-burn Starfleet that rebuilt the buildings but not the support structure, an academy that can train officers but forgot how to care for them because a century of collapse eroded the institutional knowledge. That is dramatically rich. That is setting specific. That's a show that understands its own premise. But the show plays Tilly's arrival like it's right on time. Like 6 weeks of nothing was the plan. And at this point, I genuinely can't tell if the writers think this is normal or if they just didn't count the weeks. And I don't know which answer is worse. And while we're talking about institutional science, Bavi is dead and nobody cares. Not nobody in the story. The show gave us one line in episode 7 about Kyle, who was still struggling, and that was it. But I mean, nobody in the world this show has built seems to have responded to the dead student the way any real institution or any real culture or any real family would. Bobby was a Vulcan. So where are the Vulcans? Where is Nivar? And the Vulcan homeworld has nothing to say. No diplomatic inquiry, no representative arriving to collect the body according to Vulcan traditions, no Katra concerns. You know, if it's one thing we saw in the movies, the Vulcans take death very seriously. They have an entire metaphysical framework built around the preservation of consciousness at the moment of death. So, was there anybody there that could have helped Bobby? They probably would have wanted to know that. And where are his parents? Because a child died, or at least somebody's child. We know next to nothing about his family because the show never bothered to give him one. He existed to die. He was a plot device shaped like a person, and the moment his death served the narrative function, every thread connected to him was severed. And what about Dzolo, the Romulan girl who was at his side in every scene he was in? They pranked the Academy together. They played Calica together. They were inseparable. Bobby dies, and Dzolo just kind of vanishes. If I didn't know better, I'd think the Furies got her too. But we didn't get a single scene of grieving, not a line about how she's coping, not even a background shot of her sitting alone where they used to sit. The show treated their friendship as scenery, and the moment the scenery burned down, it didn't bother cleaning up the ashes. The War College is sharing a campus with the Academy. Commander Kelrek lost one of his students. The War College has been using the Miyazaki as a training ground for a long time, as we're told. And in a joint exercise that the War College participated in, one of their cadets was killed and another one was put in a coma. Where is the War College's investigation? Where's the after-action review? What is Kelrek's opinion on any of this stuff? I'm getting a little lost on the point here, but Bobby's death should have been the event that transformed the Academy War College situation into something real. The shared grief, the mutual respect forged from loss, or the deeper resentment if the War College blamed the Academy's leadership. Any of those would require the show to remember that the War College exists as an institution with real people who lost one of their own. But like I said, I'm getting off the point here. So the episode had something that was actually kind of good. In the process of having this blowout, the cadets run a simulator mission and they fail badly. And for about 5 minutes, I thought, this is what the show should be doing. Not just once, not just in a passing scene, but every week. Every episode of Starfleet Academy should open with a simulator mission. Every single one. You drop the cadets into a scenario, they respond to it, they pass or fail. And then the drama, the comedy, the relationships, the character work, all of it flow naturally from whatever situation they just experienced. The sim gives you your premise, and the rest of the episode gives you your people. That's how you build a show about a school that trains Starfleet officers. The Sims are the engine. They generate the conflict. They reveal character under pressure. And they let you do actual science fiction every week. But honestly, I'm just looking to solve the single biggest problem the show has had from day one, that there is no science fiction in Starfleet Academy. We are something like 265 days into these cadets' campus experience, according to the narrative, almost an entire academic year at the premier institution of interstellar civilization. And I have not seen anything that qualifies as science fiction on a weekly basis. No first contact scenarios, no warp field anomalies, no ethical dilemmas about alien biology or temporal mechanics for the Prime Directive, no planetary surveys, no diplomatic simulations, no engineering puzzles. The show is set in the 32nd century, and most of the drama could take place at a performing arts college in Connecticut. Remove the pointy ears and the holograms, and you've got a CW show with a bigger set budget. A weekly sim fixes that overnight. Want to explore the Klingon honor culture? Run a scenario where the cadets have to negotiate with the Klingon fleet. Want to develop Jaden's medical skills? Put him in a triage situation during a simulated battle. Want to test Tarima's telepathy or control of telepathy in a controlled environment? To design a scenario where reading minds is the only path to success. And then the next mission can be one where it's a liability. The simulator is the most versatile storytelling tool that Star Trek has ever invented. And this show, a show literally about the Academy, has used it once for a couple minutes in episode 8. Instead, we got this scene in the third to last episode, positioned after the cadets had already survived a real crisis on the Miyazaki. We watch them hold it together during an actual hostage situation. Putting them in a controlled sim now and having them fall apart doesn't establish a baseline. It actually contradicts everything we saw a couple episodes ago. The show is asking us to forget episode 6 so that it can manufacture a lesson that should have happened in the pilot. And while I'm on the subject of what should have gone where, this episode should have been episode 7. The therapy episode, the emotional processing, Tilly arriving to help the cadets deal with the Miyazaki, that belongs immediately after the crisis and not as a vacation detour. Episode 7 Spring Break Stories, the Dream Sealing Ceremony, Genesis's Fraud, Caleb's ghosting Tarima, those are low stakes, character focused beats. That's your penultimate episode cooldown. You put the recovery episode right after the trauma. You put the breather episode right before the finale. The show did it backwards, and both episodes are weaker for it. Oh, and I like this part. Sam has been visibly glitching for 3 weeks. At an institution where the Doctor, the most advanced holographic intelligence in the Federation, a being who spent literal centuries advocating for photonic rights, who understands holographic systems better than anyone alive, or at least you would assume by this point, works down the hall from her. And for 3 weeks, the Doctor hasn't noticed. The show told us that Sam went to a holographic engineer in Denver during the break, and that the engineering crew applied a patch. But here's the thing, it apparently wasn't working or was degrading from the moment they installed it. Sam has been deteriorating since day 1 of the fix. That's not a 3-week mystery, that's a season-long story. You know, you could imagine a story where Sam came back from Denver in episode 7 looking fine, but with subtle glitches that the audience notices before she does. Little moments, a word that comes out wrong, a texture that flickers. The audience tracks her decline across episodes while she insists that she's okay. That is dramatic irony. That's tension. Instead, the show compressed the season's worth of gradual deterioration into she's been glitching for 3 weeks and nobody has noticed. And the Doctor is right there and didn't catch it. Because the plot needs Sam's malfunction to be a mystery that builds slowly, so the Doctor becomes conveniently oblivious. 900 years of accumulated expertise, a vocal advocacy career for holographic personhood, and he walks past a flickering student like she's a fluorescent light he keeps meaning to report to maintenance. Now, I do want to give credit where it's earned, because this is the first episode where I didn't actively dislike Sam, and you can mark the date. And the whole reason why was that I found out that she was a literal blank slate, that the Kaskians spent years building her and programmed her with the personality of a 17-year-old human, that she's essentially a newborn wearing an adolescent's operating system, actually retroactively making the character work better for me. Every time Sam was grating or tone deaf or exhaustingly peppy in the earlier episodes, that wasn't just bad character writing, that was a 4-month-old entity performing a personality she was handed without the lived experience to cope with what she was experiencing. But think about what this means for the Kaskians. They spent years building Sam, years of development, programming, and calibration, and in 264 days at Starfleet Academy, their creation has been shot by the Furies, patched by a holo engineer who apparently made it worse, and is now having a systemic breakdown because the makers forgot to give her childhood memories. Years of work undone in 9 months because nobody anticipated that a being programmed to act like a teenager might encounter trauma at a military academy in space. The Doctor essentially stepping into a parental figure and giving her the developmental foundation she was programmed to skip. Now that's a genuine Star Trek concept. Questions about consciousness, identity, whether you can shortcut personhood. The Doctor is the perfect character to guide her through this process because he went through his own version of this across 7 seasons of Star Trek Voyager. This isn't bad. And the show gives us something else here. The Doctor is hung up on his holographic children, specifically the family he created in the Voyager episode Real Life. He gave himself a wife, a son, and a daughter named Belle. He watched Belle die, and Tom Paris convinced him to stay in the program and face the grief rather than just deleting it. It was one of the most affecting hours Voyager ever produced as it related to the Doctor, and the grief is apparently still with him 900 years later, which, okay, that tracks emotionally. Losing a child, even a holographic one, is the kind of wound that doesn't close. And I'm not going to tell anyone that their grief has an expiration date, but I am going to ask why the show chose to focus on this grief and not his bigger grief. The Doctor has been alive for 900 years. He is a hologram in a universe of organic beings. Every friend he has ever made has died. Every colleague, every student, every person who ever mattered to him is gone. This wasn't lost to violence, not to tragedy, just to time. He has watched generations come and go the way we watch the seasons change. And every future timeline we've seen, every alternate reality, every glimpse of his personal life, he keeps falling in love with biological people. He keeps choosing relationships with people that he will inevitably outlive. That's the 900-year wound that he should have. The Doctor doesn't just grieve his holographic doctor, he should be grieving everyone. He is a being defined by perpetual loss, and the only people who could truly share his experience are other photonic beings like Sam, who is going to outlive every organic friend she makes at the Academy, the same way the Doctor has outlived every organic friend he is going to make, or he has made, for 9 centuries. The parent-child dynamic between the Doctor and Sam shouldn't just be about giving her a childhood. It should be about him preparing her for the thing nobody prepared him for, the loneliness of permanence. That Star Trek episode would write itself. Instead, the show gives us a narrower grief, the safer grief, the one that doesn't require grappling with what it actually means to be immortal in a mortal universe. And after doing so, it makes us wait. The Doctor parents her, he gives her what she needs, and then instead of showing us how that changes her, how the childhood reshapes the personality, what Sam looks like on the other side of that developmental experience, the episode ends and we're told to come back next week. The show just kicked one of its most interesting character developments down the road. Again. Every good idea on the show arrives through a chain of missed opportunities, and every payoff gets deferred to an episode that's running out of room. Moving on to Jaden, he has a cold. He's a Klingon at Starfleet Academy in the 32nd century, where the Doctor can cure virtually anything. He doesn't go see the Doctor, he walks around sniffling, and somewhere, Worf is rolling over in Stovokor. Not because the Klingon got a cold, but because the Klingon got a cold and didn't even have the decency to be dramatic about it. Because the writers needed him to have something going on this week, and Klingon with a cold was the path of least resistance. And in case you were wondering, he's interested in Warrior Stew again. Now at this point, I'm keeping a list. Every time the show needs to remind you that Jaden is Klingon, it reaches for the same 4 to 10 things. Warrior Stew, Honor, Batleth, Battle. That's the entire cultural toolkit this writing room has for one of the most complicated species that has ever been introduced in sci-fi. I'm half expecting him to turn to the camera next week and say, today is a good day to die, just to fill out the bingo card. Tilly shows up as a visiting instructor, third-year professor, teaches theater in the Beta Quadrant. And I need to flag something about Tilly herself because the show treats her arrival as if she's the obvious person for this job, and I don't understand why. Tilly is from the 23rd century. She served above the USS Discovery before Kirk's 5-year mission even started. She time-traveled 900 years into the future and eventually became a teacher. And her speciality on Discovery was theoretical engineering, warp theory, spore drive mechanics. She was a science officer on the engineering track. At no point in her on-screen career has Sylvia Tilly demonstrated any formal training in the humanities, in psychology, in pedagogy, or in theatrical instruction. She went from theoretical engineer to theater professor, the same way the show goes from problem solving to solution, which is by skipping every step in between. She is not a trauma counselor. She is not a therapist. She is not someone with 3 decades of experience in 32nd century psychological framework. She is a time-displaced theoretical engineer from a pre-Kirk Starfleet who somehow teaches theater, and the show has never once explained that career pivot. And she is the person that Ake called, not someone who wandered in. Captain Ake specifically reached out to Tilly for this job, when she could have reached out to a Betazoid counselor, in a century where Betazed has just become an active Federation member with an entire culture built around emotional intelligence. not a holographic therapy specialist in a building where the doctor could design a targeted therapeutic program over lunch. Not any of the presumably trained mental health professionals that a functional Starfleet Academy should have on staff. The Chancellor of Starfleet Academy looked at a campus full of 32nd century resources and called a theoretical engineer from before Kirk's era who pivoted to theater at some undisclosed point. And while we're on Tilly, why are there cadets in the Beta Quadrant? The Academy is in San Francisco, on Earth. The entire premise of this show is that it just reopened after a century of collapse and is rebuilding from the ground up. Where is Tilly running theater classes? Is there a satellite campus nobody mentioned? An exchange program? A semester abroad so that cadets can find themselves doing improv near the Romulan border? The show drops this detail like it's nothing, and maybe it is nothing, but when your setting already feels like it was designed on a napkin, every unexplained detail adds to the pile. And speaking of that napkin, how are there third-year students at a school that's been open for 1 year? The entire dramatic premise of the series is that Starfleet Academy was shuttered for over a century and just reopened. These are first-year cadets, and these are the first cadets in 100 years. That's the show's own pilot. That is its marketing. And yet somehow, they're upperclassmen. The school has been open for less than an academic year, and it already has a class hierarchy that nobody can explain. Either the show forgot its own premise, or there's a backstory it never bothered to share with the audience, and at this point, I genuinely don't know which one is worse. And then there's the theater itself. The show is spending significant screen time on a theater exercise as the vehicle for emotional processing, with 2 episodes of runway left. This is what gets the real estate. And they're doing 20th century lit. These cadets live in the 32nd century. The 20th century is 1200 years ago for them. That's 800 AD if we were making a comparison. Imagine your trauma counselor handing you a Carolingian manuscript and saying, hey, you should find yourself in this. If the entire pedagogical premise is that performing a story helps you process your own emotions, why wouldn't you have the cadets write their own story? Have them create original pieces drawn from their actual experiences. Let Jaden put into words what it cost him to be the thing his culture doesn't have a name for. Let a hologram who's 4 months old perform a scene about being born with somebody else's personality and the expectations of being an emissary. Let the telepath who killed a room full of people with her mind put that into words on a stage where she controls the narrative. That is real therapy. That's also science fiction. That's a Star Trek episode where the speculative premise generates the drama, where the exercise only works because these characters are who they are and come from where they come from. Nobody else in the galaxy has these specific stories because it takes place 1,000 years from now. The material is sitting right there. Instead, 20th century lit. 1,200-year-old text from a single planet's cultural canon, performed by cadets from 6 different species who have their own 1,200-year artistic traditions the show has never explored. It's not just a missed opportunity, it's a tell. And the writers reach for what they know instead of what the characters would know, and the result is a therapy exercise that belongs in a freshman acting seminar on present-day Earth, and not an interstellar academy in the deep future. I'm questioning why the institution's answer to our cadets watched a classmate die is, let's see if the time-displaced theater professor is free. The problem is that she's a band-aid on a wound the permanent staff let fester for over a month and a half. The vehicle she's using to dress it belongs in a season with room to spare. And the show never once asks whether she's actually the right person for this, because the show doesn't seem to know who the right person would look like. And there's something deeper happening here that I want to name because it bothers me beyond the plot mechanics. By having a theoretical engineer running theater as therapy, the show is committing a kind of stolen valor against 2 disciplines at once. It's telling you that psychology, a rigorous science with centuries of research, clinical frameworks, ethical standards, and specialized training, isn't really necessary. That being kind and theatrical is close enough, that you don't need a trained therapist if you've got a warm personality and a copy of Our Town. Theater, an art form with its own deep traditions, is its own body of theory about how performance transforms understanding. It's just something anybody can teach if they're enthusiastic about it. The show is treating the humanities the way a lot of people treat the humanities, as the soft option. The thing you do when the real work is done. Theater isn't a discipline here, it's a vibe. And psychology isn't a profession, it's a feeling. If you care enough, you're qualified. That's not just bad writing, that's a bad worldview, and it's one that devalues the exact kind of rigorous emotional work this episode is supposedly about. But the main story beat for this episode is the fact that Tarima comes back. And I'm going to talk about this for a while because the show broke her in about 4 different ways all at once, and I don't think they noticed any of them. Now, let's start with the obvious. Tarima should not be back yet. In episode 6, this character removed her neuroinhibitor and unleashed a psionic blast powerful enough to kill a room of hostiles. It was the most dramatic moment of the season, and it put her into a coma. She was shipped home to Betazed to recover. Now, this is not a 6-week injury. That does not take some time off and come back for the final act injury. That is a character-defining, season-reshaping event that should have kept her off screen for the rest of the year. Think about this from a storytelling perspective. Tarima's sacrifice means more if it costs something real. If she's gone and the squad has to function without her, if Caleb has to reckon with her absence instead of her presence, if the show forces the other characters to fill the gap she left and grow in the process, her return in a hypothetical season 2, healed, changed, maybe with new control over her abilities or maybe without it, that becomes a major event. That's a moment that the audience has been waiting for, and she is back 2 episodes later. The coma is a plot speed bump, and apparently psionic brain death is a long weekend kind of injury in the 32nd century. The sacrifice costs nothing permanent, and the show can't even be bothered to deal with the consequences of her return in a way that respects what happens to her. And here's the thing that the show really kills me with, is the show never once asks, what is a coma like for a telepath? Now think about that for a second. Tarima is able to read minds. That's not a skill she turns on, it's a background hum of her existence. Every betazoid in proximity is a voice she can hear. Every organic mind is a presence that she can feel. Now put that person into a coma. Was she trapped? Was she aware of what was happening? Can she still sense the minds around her? Can she feel the doctors, her brother, her father? Can she just not reach out to them? Or could she communicate to them? Or perhaps it's the first time since birth that the noise just stopped. And if so, is waking up an act of relief or trauma in itself? The flood of every mind on Betazed rushing back in at once. Now that is a story. That's a science fiction story using a fantastical premise to explore something real. What does consciousness mean to her? What does isolation do to a social species? And what does it cost to come back? Now, we don't get a single line on that in the episode. Tarima was in a coma, and now she's not. That's the depth of the exploration that we get for a telepathic mind experiencing involuntary unconsciousness. The most interesting question the show has accidentally raised, and it walked right by it. Now, they also gave her a biological problem. You see, Tarima's abilities are genetic. They are biological. She is betazoid. Telepathy is what her species does. The show established that she's more sensitive than most betazoids, which is why she wore the neuroinhibitor. But the underlying ability is natural. It's part of her physiology, and it's how she was born. So explain to me why her natural biological ability put her in a coma. This would be like saying a human used their eyes too hard and it shut down their brain, or someone ran so fast that their legs stopped working permanently. Your body doesn't damage itself by performing its evolved functions when you are healthy. That's just not how biology works. Now, I can understand the neuroinhibitor for a child. Children are prone to heightened emotional states, and a betazoid kid with extraordinary psychic sensitivity who hasn't learned any emotional regulation, slap an inhibitor on her before she accidentally broadcasts a tantrum and to every mind in the building. That makes sense, and that wouldn't be oppression, that would be parenting. That's a reasonable precaution for a developing brain that hasn't caught up to its own hard way. But Tarima isn't a child. She's a young adult. She's been living with this ability her entire life. And at some point, the inhibitor should have transitioned from a safety net to a crutch, and then been removed entirely as she developed the emotional maturity and discipline to manage what her body naturally did. That's how development works. You don't keep the training wheels on forever, you learn how to ride the bike. The fact that Tarima still needed the inhibitor as a near adult at a military academy is, in itself, a failure of everybody who raised her. But the show doesn't frame it that way. It frames the inhibitor as a permanent necessity and her removal of it as a desperate, dangerous act. The implication is that the ability itself is dangerous to her and not just other people. And that doesn't track with how a biological trait that her species naturally evolved to have should endure. The show needed a dramatic consequence for her choice on the Miyazaki, and a coma is dramatic, so a coma is what they wrote. But they didn't think through whether it made sense for this specific character with this specific physiology. The drama came first, and the logic came never. And then we have the institution failing her again. The entire campus apparently knows what she did, or at least it portrays it as if they know what she did. Not just the squad on the Miyazaki, not just the command staff that she was isolated with, everyone. The whole student body apparently knows that Tarima unleashed the psychic blast that killed the Furies, and nobody in the chain of command thought to compartmentalize that information. Now, this is the only daughter of the president of Betazed. Her father's commitment to the Federation was one of the most significant diplomatic wins of the rebuilding era. They offered to build the new Federation headquarters on his planet to get him to sign. Tarima is simultaneously a political asset, a diplomatic tripwire, and now a demonstrated weapon of mass destruction. That person gets a classified file and a security detail. She does not get a campus-wide reputation that turns her into a social pariah. Starfleet's information security is apparently on par with a group chat that somebody forgot to mute. Now, despite her species being members of the Federation since the TNG era, or before the TNG era, the show wanted her to feel isolated. It wanted the drama of the other cadets treating her differently. So the information just leaked, consequence-free, because the plot demanded it. And speaking of her father, where is President Siddal? His daughter nearly died under Starfleet's watch. She was essentially used as a weapon of last resort during a mission that Starfleet botched. She's back at the Academy now, and the student body is treating her like a freak. And the president of Betazed, the man whose entire political arc in Episode 2 revolved around whether he trusted the Federation enough to rejoin, has nothing to say on screen. There was no angry Zoom call, no diplomatic incident, no scene of Tarima dealing with a protective or furious father. There was nothing. And for a Betazoid, his emotional range is remarkably limited to whatever the plot doesn't need right now. We also do not get the feelings from the War College crowd, and you would think they would have something to say since Tarima neutralized an entire boarding party with her mind. No weapon, no backup, just her. The War College should be fighting tooth and nail to keep her because she just became their most important cadet. She's the most tactically significant individual on the entire campus. And in a post-burn Federation that is desperate for a defensive capability, someone who can do what Tarima did isn't just a student. She's an asset that changes strategic calculations. The War College should be building their entire curriculum around her. Instead, they don't even seem to notice she exists anymore. You would think an institution with war in its name would notice that one of their students turned out to be a living photon torpedo, but apparently the paperwork was just too much. And this is where the show is leaving the most interesting moral territory completely unexplored. When a student becomes a weapon to save her peers, the institution's first response isn't theater class, it's debriefing. Containment. It's a closed-door conversation between admirals about what this individual means for the Federation's defensive posture. Every military in history that has discovered an extraordinary capability in one of its own people has faced the same question. Do we protect this person or do we deploy them? Is Starfleet being negligent by ignoring what Tarima can do? Or would the more disturbing story be that they're not ignoring it at all? That somewhere off screen, someone is quietly ensuring that she stays at the Academy where they can study her, train her, prepare her for a role that she hasn't consented to. The show has a psionic weapon of mass destruction living in the dormitories, and it's not asking whether the institution is protecting her or grooming her. That gray space between duty of care and military necessity is exactly the kind of morally complex storytelling Star Trek is supposed to excel at. And this show isn't even aware it's sitting on it. And now the show tells us that Tarima has been moved to the Academy. She's lost agency, they say. She's been transferred against her will, or at least without her enthusiasm, and we're supposed to feel the weight of that. Except, why did Tarima choose the War College in the first place? Think about it. We're 8 episodes in, and the show has never mentioned it. She's the president of Betazed's daughter. She's a telepath. She's from the first house. She enrolled in the War College instead of the Academy, and the show has never once explained that decision. It could have been political. Was her father trying to position her for military leadership? Was it personal? Did she want distance from the Academy cadets, or was she drawn to the War College's emphasis on defense over exploration? Did it have something to do with her abilities? Was the War College's battlefield resilience curriculum a better fit for someone who might need to weaponize her gifts? We don't know. The show never told us. So when they say that Tarima lost agency by being moved to the Academy, we don't actually know what she lost. We can't feel the weight of the transfer because we were never given the weight of the original choice. It's another consequence without foundation. The show is asking us to care about this change, but it never established the baseline. Now, as far as the telepathy goes, this is the part where the show's logic is going to collapse and won't be able to get back up from. Tarima is a telepath and a particularly gifted one, not an empath, but a telepath. That distinction matters. Deanna Troi in TNG was half Betazoid, half human, and her abilities were limited to reading emotion. Tarima is full Betazoid. She reads thoughts. The show has been explicit that her psychic sensitivity is so extraordinary that even Betazoids consider her dangerous. She sensed Caleb's hidden trauma from across a room. She doesn't get impressions, she gets information. And in this episode, the episode about her return, her recovery, her reintegration into campus life, she doesn't use telepathy once. Her brother, Occam, is right there. He's been on campus all season. 2 full Betazoids in the same building, and they don't communicate telepathically. That's how Betazoids talk to each other. It is their primary mode of communication with their own kind. Loxana Troi was practically offended when people insisted on speaking out loud. Tarima and Occam being together on screen and not sharing a single telepathic exchange is like watching 2 siblings who speak the same language insist on passing notes in a language they both learned last week. But the show doesn't think of Tarima as a telepath. It thinks of her as a person who has telepathy when the script calls for it. And this episode, the script didn't call for it at all. So her defining ability, the thing that puts her in a coma, the thing that the entire campus is afraid of, the thing that should be reshaping every interaction she has, just isn't there. Why doesn't the show engage with this at all? It treats her social isolation as if she's a normal person dealing with a bad reputation, not a telepath drowning in the unfiltered emotional broadcast of hundreds of people who are scared of her. That's a psychological crisis. That's the kind that could trigger another psychic episode, and the episode just skips past it. And while we're following the telepathy thread, go back to episode 7. Genesis fabricated her recommendation letters. She manipulated Caleb into helping her cover it up. That fraud was the most significant character secret of the season. And Tarima has been in proximity to the Genesis since episode 1, or episode 2. She's vaguely in the same social circles. She has shared scenes with her, and now she's going to be living with her. The idea that Genesis' guilt, her constant anxiety about being caught, her fear of exposure, the deception she was maintaining every day, never registered on Tarima's radar. The emotional signature of someone maintaining a career-ending lie isn't subtle. It should be the loudest thing that Tarima picks up on. So either Tarima's abilities work or they don't. If they work, Genesis' secret should have been obvious to her almost immediately, but Genesis needed to stay hidden until episode 7, so Tarima's telepathy quietly switched off whenever it should have mattered. This is the fundamental problem with giving a character extraordinary abilities and then forgetting what those abilities mean for every other storyline. Her defining trait only exists when it's useful, which means it's not a character trait. It's a special effect that they turn on and off. Tarima has the most advanced mind in the building, and the show keeps putting it in airplane mode. There are 2 episodes left. Caleb's mother is still dangling. The Furies are presumably still out there. Nusbraka is presumably scheming. And the show just burned its 3rd to last episode on a therapy session 6 weeks too late in world time. A simulator exercise that should have been the structural backbone of the entire series was relegated to comedy. And the theater workshop, they just don't have the episode count to justify the theater workshop. We are 264 days into Starfleet Academy's in-universe experience, and I've barely seen science fiction. So I said it last week, and I'll say it again. This show keeps telling us that cadets are special, that they are the future, that this institution is worth rebuilding. And every single week, the institution proves it isn't. I started this video by saying that what happened on the Miyazaki isn't science fiction for the audience watching the show. Students watching classmates die is Tuesday in 2026. And I keep coming back to that because it means something specific about what this show owes its audience. The real schools fail their students after real violence. When the counselors are underfunded and debriefs come too late, and the institution protects itself instead of the kids inside it, we understand why. We hate it, but we understand. Resources are too scarce. Bureaucracies are slow. The system wasn't built to respond to that. But Starfleet doesn't get that excuse. Starfleet has unlimited resources, 9 centuries of research, telepaths, holograms, and it still fails worse than our own reality does. The escapist fiction is less prepared for tragedy than the actual broken world its audience lives in. And that's just not a writing failure. That's a betrayal of what the setting is supposed to mean. Or Star Trek has always been the franchise that says we figured it out. That's the promise. We solved poverty, disease. We built a society where institutions work because the people built them to work. This show about the school that trains these people can't even get grief counseling right. They've got 2 episodes to land this plane, and I don't think they can do it. But that's all for me. This is Second Draft, and I'll see you next week.